All right, great. We're going to start the town hall now. There will be 4 of us that'll be talking and then taking questions and listening to everybody's thoughts. So I'll start us off. Next slide, please.
We should also explain that Bailey is also here, who's artifact chair for next year.
Yes, good point. Sorry, I didn't know I didn't put you on the slide, Bailey. There are 5 of us here, including Bailey Kasmark, who's an artifact chair for next year. Right. Okay, next slide. Okay, for those of you who aren't aware, I'll go over roughly how PETS is structured. There is a board, a PET board, that chooses the program chairs and general chairs of the conference PETS and the journal PETS every year. They also choose some of the other chairs, such as for hot PETS. And that board is itself composed of past program chairs and general chairs. And for people that want to host PETS, they submit their hosting proposals to the PET board. So the PET board also makes the decision of where to host PETS. And as you probably know, the PETS follows a hybrid journal conference model where the papers are published in the PETS journal, and then there's a PETS conference, which is where we are now. Okay, next slide, please. So here's some information about PETS submissions over time. You can see in the left graph the number of submissions every year, which is steadily increased. This year we hit 436 submissions, which is a 29% increase over last year, pretty substantial. The middle graph shows, I thought I had captions, the middle graph shows the number of accepted papers, also growing, although not quite as fast as the submitted papers. And therefore, you can see that our acceptance rate, while roughly staying between 15 and 25%, this year hit 19%. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, yeah, I think this is running off of Google Drive, so it messed up the captions. But that's fine. Previous slide. Okay, so here are some of the statistics about the decisions that were made. There are 5 decisions, roughly speaking, that PETS can give a paper: accept, shepherd, which is an accept decision, just asking for some minor revisions; major revisions, which asks for another submission with major updates to the paper; a reject and resubmit, which is a rejection decision, but encourages the authors to try again; and then reject, which is also rejection and doesn't encourage a resubmission of the paper in any form. You can see the breakdown of the fraction of papers that received each decision this year. About 2/3 of the papers receive some form of reject decision, although the majority of those, I think it's like 2/3 of that, receive a reject and resubmit, which encourages the author to consider revising and sending a new version to PETS. And about a quarter of the papers receive a major revisions, or 20% receive a major revisions decision, which is a very positive decision, actually, because most major revisions, if resubmitted, end up getting accepted, but it does require major changes and another submission. And then in smaller fractions of the papers, around 10%, are accepted or shepherded overall. So you can see for each type of submission, their acceptance rates. It's a little hard to see because the captions got affected here, but for the new submissions, which are the bar graphs on the left, although only 7.5% about were accepted, actually another 20% got a major revisions decision, which is, again, a very positive decision. So while you might think that the acceptance rates for new papers are quite low, you actually have nearly a 30% chance of getting on the road to acceptance for PETS with the new submission. So it may be better than it first appears. And then you can see that the next bars, which is the major revision submissions, what the decisions on those were, and over 85% of major revisions ended up getting accepted or shepherded. And then a small fraction, about 8.5% of major revisions got another major revisions decision, which we avoid because we don't want to get in a cycle of endless revisions. But sometimes if the authors are making good progress, but they haven't really done what the reviewers were asking for, it's the best decision. So we do make that sometimes. And then there's a small fraction, I think it's like 5% of major revisions, where the authors just didn't get what the reviewers were asking for, and we decide to end the process and they don't end up being accepted. The last set of bars is for papers that are reject and resubmit papers. For those papers, the acceptance rates are slightly higher than for new papers, but it's not really that high. It's nowhere near major revisions. So our observation is that if you get a reject and resubmit decision, generally speaking, you only have a slightly higher chance of getting accepted or major revisions than new papers, despite the fact that you got feedback from the reviewers and you tried again. So it is not that positive of a decision, and we have sort of changed our communication to authors this year to reflect that fact that it's not a very positive decision, and they need to take the criticism seriously and make major efforts if they want to be in that 15% that gets accepted in the next submission. Next slide.
Can I for a second?
Yep.
I just want to say one conclusion that I draw from the statistics that Aaron just showed, and I apologize for jumping in here, is that the actual acceptance rate is much higher than the acceptance rate that in the previous graph was shown, because a lot of people are lacking acceptance by going through a major revision first, and then are accepted in later issues when hopefully the number of papers have already risen. So the accepted papers over the turned-in papers is lower than the major revisions over the turned-in papers.
Yeah, and because we're receiving increasing numbers of papers, we have a large number of papers that have gotten major revisions but haven't yet been accepted. If we were in the steady state, I think you could just count the accepted and shepherded fraction, and that should reflect your overall acceptance. But as the papers increase, we have this increasing pool of papers that just recently got major revisions. So yeah, it makes the acceptance rate look lower than it actually will be in the long term. Okay, so what appears at PETS? We can see that indeed the case is that most papers go through major revisions. I think it's about 2/3 of the papers that appear at PETS, maybe 60%. First got a major revision, or were submitted to the issue which they were accepted. They were submitted as a major revision, and then a large number of them were submitted as new papers, and a small fraction were submitted as a paper that had been rejected and resubmitted in the previous one. And looking at the issues, the blue portions of each bar are the papers that were not accepted, and the green portions are those that were accepted. We were getting increasing numbers of submissions with every issue, so you can kind of see that trend in both the accepted and the overall number of papers. It is different than in the past, where we noticed a peak at issue 2, because issue 2 gives you 2 issues to do major revisions and still appear at that year's PETS. So that's not happening this year, but it's probably because authors that are doing that sort of thing are just being swamped by the overall increasing number of submissions. That's my takeaway. Next slide. Okay, here are listed the topics that authors self-select for their papers upon submission. There are 2 clear outliers here: cryptographic tools for privacy, the papers that contribute primarily to cryptography or make use primarily of cryptography, and machine learning. Those are far and away the most popular topics among the papers that were submitted to PETS. We can also see information leakage, differential privacy, and web privacy being pretty popular topics. I think the next slide is artifacts. If you go to that. Oh no, this is my last one. Okay. So something that happened in 2021 is that we applied for and received an upgrade to our core ranking. PETS is now an A-ranked core conference. If you're not familiar with it, core is the Computing Research and Education Association of Australasia, which you might wonder why it's important if you're not in Australia or New Zealand. But it is the case that this is a widely used ranking used elsewhere to understand how effective or influential a conference is. So this reflects, I think, that PETS is a good conference and has been for a while. It just takes the ranking services a while to catch up to it, and we finally had the chance. They opened them up they don't do this every year, so this was our first chance in recent history to upgrade our ranking. You can see some of the peer A-ranked conferences in security and privacy, TCC, ESC, Asia Crypt. there is a ranking above that is A star. CPS, NDSS are in that. Maybe we should get there. At some point, I think. But I'm very happy that we're at least among the top conferences in our area, and the only privacy-focused conference among these conferences with these rankings. Okay, I think the next slide. I think the artifacts is next. Okay, before that, I just want to encourage people to sign up for the rump session. If you go to the program, there's a link to a Google form that you could submit to submit your talk to talk. This rump session will be at the end of the day on Wednesday, so please sign up for that. Okay, go ahead, Bailey, please.
Oh, I'll just jump in and introduce Bailey, who is joining me as a new artifact review chair. So I'm very happy about that. I'll just go through the first slide, and then I'll let Bailey talk about a new artifact award that we're going to introduce for the next year. This is just an overview of 2021. So our artifact committee had 13 different reviewers, and this ended up being a very good size given the number of submissions that we had. There are different, we had the authors of accepted papers submit their artifacts at the camera ready deadline, and they selected what type of artifact they submitted. It was a self-selected category, and most of the artifacts we received were for source code, but we also received data sets. Each artifact was assigned to reviewers, and each reviewer had at most 2 artifacts per round. So I think the load was pretty reasonable. Just more details about the review. It's single blind, so anonymous reviewers. These papers have been accepted, so it's kind of difficult to do anonymous author submissions. Most artifacts require 1 back and forth round with reviewers, so the authors submit their artifacts. Almost all artifacts require a little bit of work, and then the authors fix that and resubmit it, and at that point it's usually ready to go. We do have some exceptions, and in general I would say, as was the case last year, one of the challenges with artifact review is that the turnaround time can be quite slow, since this is far after the paper has been accepted and people are working on new projects or have moved on from being grad students. So we tend to keep very lenient deadlines, but we do end up with some straggling artifacts that we keep constantly trying to push through the pipeline. Next slide. Okay, so here's just some statistics similar to how we presented last year. We had 34 artifacts submitted this year. 13 have been fully accepted, 20 are still being reviewed. Many of those are for issue 4, which we have not finished the review process for yet. And we had 1 artifact rejected. The only absolute rejection we've had so far was due to the fact that somebody tried to submit a binary blob instead of open source code. And we made a decision not to accept this as an artifact. But I suppose that could be an ongoing discussion in the future. Most submissions had more than 1 type, so they were both source code and some kind of scripts or data sets. 29 submissions included some type of code, and 15 submissions included data sets. You can see a breakdown here of submissions per issue. We have the most submissions for issue 4, but we had a pretty even amount. There were very few submissions for issue 1, however, and we're up from 25 total submissions last year. And now I'll hand it off to Bailey, who's going to talk about artifact awards. Thanks.
All right, so if we could just have the next slide. As Cecilia said, we're going to be introducing a new artifact award for the 2022 cycle. In large part, this has been motivated by receiving some truly exceptional artifacts, and we want to kind of reward this effort that authors are making. So the award we're proposing will acknowledge the particular artifact's excellence on the PETS website, similar to other awards that already exist. Any of the artifacts that have been submitted within this next 2022 PETS publication year for any of the submission cycles will be eligible. Award worthiness is going to be determined based on the author's initial submission, and this is to encourage the strong initial submission and reward the authors for these upfront efforts before going through the iterative process with the reviewers. Our artifact committee members can nominate any artifact when they submit their review for it. And we're going to, after all of the artifacts have been reviewed and the assorted nominations have come through, have a committee of 2 to 3 members of the artifact committee, which will include the chairs, Cecilia and myself, to evaluate these nominated artifacts, focusing on their reproducibility, their usability, and their accessibility to the audience they're being directed at. So if you have any input or questions, we'd be happy to hear about them throughout the week. And with that, I will turn it over to whomever is speaking next. I don't know.
Okay, I was hoping that we would actually skip this slide, so let's go to the next one right away. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that we changed starting actually this issue, Michelle and I. And it is a little bit in response to what happened in terms of the very much increasing number of papers that we got, which induces a very much increased number of reviews, which in turn induces a very much increased load on the PC chairs of reading those reviews. And in my opinion, what I always valued about PETS is that PETS had one of the best review processes in the community. And what Michelle and I try to do is try to keep that at this high level as possible. And we've done a couple of things, and one will come up later on. But one thing that we did is we instantiated a senior program committee whose task it is actually to read and help improve the reviews and lead the discussion in coming to a consensus, so that we have actually a high quality of reviews, that every review is being read and provides fair and accurate feedback to the process. In addition, in last year's town hall meeting, when I was present, I heard a strong desire to have a feedback process on the reviews for all that are being received. And this is a difficult thing to do. However, we have a test run process that we try to be a little bit more systematic this year. And we will collect review from the authors, from fellow reviewers, and from the senior program committee. And one of the questions where one can ask already is the perception of reviews consistent among those 3 groups? And does it even make sense to collect review from all of these 3 groups going forward? And we will be very careful not to instantiate some sort of reviewer rating, and instead keep the numbers very much at an aggregate level. So these are 2 changes to the review process. Michelle, is it okay if I talk about the last point before going to the ethics? So another thing is we did increase the program committee, because I think people who have been on the program committee for issue 4 in 2021 would agree that the review load was very high, and many reviewers complained to Aaron and me about that they could not yet take yet another review, and although we probably would have needed them to do because of these or that circumstances. So again, in the interest of review quality, we increased the PC. However, if the increase in submissions goes on like in 2021, we need to be prepared for yet another program committee extension. We will probably be issue another request for nominations and see who can we get from the community on the program committee in order to keep the review load reasonable, which at the moment it is, but we want to keep that also going forward, because also a lower reviewing load ensures higher review quality overall. Okay, with that, I will pass on to Michelle for now. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just,
okay. So I don't know that we have to spend a long time on this, but yeah, we're just adding a little bit of extra depth to, ethics review has always been a part of PETS reviewing. Like, this is not new, but we're just adding a little bit of extra depth, basically to make sure that if there's any paper with ethical concerns, we want to make sure that those concerns get brought up and that they receive, a sufficient amount of consideration. And so basically what we're doing is we're introducing a way for, starting issue 2, for reviewers to indicate whether they have any ethical concerns that they don't think have been sufficiently explained or mitigated by what the authors write. So the question is not, does this paper have ethical implications? Because I think, basically every paper submitted to PETS has ethical implications. But the question is, is there some ethical issue with this paper that is not sufficiently resolved? And so that will sort of call attention to the issue, which we're going to ask the senior PC member and the reviewers to, consider. And then as needed, we have a set of volunteer sort of ethics task force folks from the program committee who have agreed to sort of take on short notice additional ethics focused reviews. So they will, when we think it's necessary, we'll do another read and provide another ethics perspective with the goal of just sort of folding this into the overall discussion. This is not like send the paper over to some other corner to be debated in an ethics sense. It's trying to bring the ethical implications into the overall review of the scientific contribution of the paper. So that's kind of at a high level what we're planning to do. We'll put a little bit more information about that up with the CFP before too long. And yeah, I think that's mostly, how that's going to work. So.
Okay, I think we can open up the floor to comments, questions, suggestions. Let's see. So if you have a question or comment, you can come to the mic. I also seen some show up in the chat. The one that I saw that I think hasn't been addressed is about open review.
Right, I just tried to post a little bit of a response, but we can definitely discuss it in more detail. I also think we have a couple of questions on the next slide. If you go to the next slide. Or did we remove those? Yeah, okay. So in general, what I see as the big challenge for PETS, if this continues to grow, is how do we handle the increase in the number of submissions? Right? If PETS is going to grow at this rate, this really intensive review process is under a lot of challenges. And I believe that maintaining that will be very, very difficult. Also, we are, as we have now moved into an A-rank conference, thanks to Aaron and a number of other people, which Aaron can list, we receive a broader set of topics. And it is very difficult for us as PC chairs to decide to decide on the scope of PETS. That's also an effect of the number of submissions. So these are basically things that I think we should think about in terms of if we continue to grow at the rate that we have been growing, there will be a lot of strain on the current system. And yes, the other one, the fourth question put up here is, we're basically in the situation right now, is how do we have future conferences, right? Is a hybrid mode is that something we need? Is that something we want? Maybe some thoughts around how you want to meet as a group. Is this something like this? Is this something you like? Is this like an option you like to have, but you would also like to have the in-person option? Or would you only want to have an in-person option, right? So this is also something where we struggle a little bit with what the community thinks.
All right, those are some seed questions.
Right. If you type in the chat, please type to everyone. Otherwise, we do not see it. The default is nearby, and I made the same mistake. And nearby is only the ones that are, I don't know in what kind of circle around you. So Aaron apparently didn't even see my nearby comment on the open review until I actually posted it to everyone.